The events of that day happened so long ago that many details have become blurry. But I still remember some key moments, memories that I can never forget. It was the last day of school, and I was in the 4th grade. 4th graders needed their parents to pick them up after school, while 5th graders were allowed to walk home on their own. My family always came to pick me up, especially on these special days. I had also planned to play with a friend after school, as a way to celebrate the end of the term. As we lined up and prepared to leave from the school exit, a stranger waved at me, walked towards me, and introduced himself as a relative of my friend. He said he was there to pick us up. At that time, I was too young to question adults, so I simply nodded and told the teacher nearby that I was leaving. The teacher asked where the person was, and I pointed to him. She then let me go. At first, the man seemed friendly. He talked a lot, speaking quickly, and asked me trivial questions like how I was doing in school and what activities I liked. I remember he was walking so fast that I had to almost run to keep up. I didn't think much of it until we reached his car. I looked at the car and felt something was off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. After getting into the car, I noticed that my friend wasn't there. When I asked, the man vaguely said that my friend had already gone home and that we would meet him there. I began to feel uneasy, but I didn't show it directly. The car sped up and we moved further and further away from the route I was familiar with. I looked around and realized we were in an area I didn't recognize at all. Finally, we arrived at what he called his house. Everything looked ordinary on the surface, but when he led me inside, it was very dark, with the curtains tightly shut. The only light came from a dim lamp in the corner. He locked the door behind us, and the atmosphere became oppressive and eerie. I asked where my friend was, and his expression turned anxious as he said my friend was in the basement, telling me to wait here. He turned and went into another room, and I heard a door open as he began descending the stairs. Fear surged through me, and I knew I couldn't stay there. I tried to open the door, but it was locked and needed a key. I felt helpless and desperate, but I forced myself to stay calm. I found a wall-mounted phone in the kitchen, picked it up, and dialed for help, whispering that I was trapped in a stranger's house. Without ending the call, I quietly hid the phone and returned to where the man had left me, listening for his footsteps. Soon, he reappeared, calling for me to come downstairs and meet my friend. I didn't respond, and his face immediately turned serious. He walked over, grabbed my wrist, and forcibly dragged me towards the basement. I tried to resist, but it was no use. I was pulled to the stairs and heard the door slam shut and lock behind me. The basement was cold and nearly empty, with just a single support beam and a yellow light hanging from the ceiling. I sat on the floor, filled with despair. Then, I heard knocking at the door, followed by the doorbell ringing, again and again. Someone was knocking outside, and the sound grew more urgent. Finally, the door opened, and I heard footsteps entering the house. Soon after, the voices of police officers filled the air, and I shouted loudly, telling them I was trapped in the basement. A few minutes later, the door opened, and a police officer pulled me out of there. Outside, police car lights were flashing, and I was finally rescued. The man was brought out in handcuffs and disappeared from my life forever. Everything happened so quickly, but I knew that if it hadn't been for that phone call, I might never have seen my family again. That experience left a deep scar on my heart. Over time, many details have faded, but the fear will never go away. Even though it happened years ago, it still keeps me up at night. It was the last day of junior year in high school, and many students chose to skip class or leave early after lunch. My friends and I also decided to end the day early, but the weather was unusual. Dark clouds filled the sky, and thunder was rumbling. Originally, our grade had planned to relax at the beach on the last day, but the upcoming storm ruined all the plans. In the end, my friends and I decided to do something a bit more thrilling. In town, there was an abandoned school that had been vacant for 10 years. No one had entered it in that time. The school was already scheduled for demolition by the end of the year. Seeing this as an opportunity, we decided to sneak inside and take a look. The school was in a remote area, surrounded by old residential neighborhoods. Behind the school was an abandoned parking lot, with trees and walls obscuring most of the view, making it easy for us to enter without being noticed. The windows of the building weren't boarded up, and although the doors were locked, we planned to enter through a broken window. We opened a cracked window and took turns climbing inside. As I stepped into the empty classroom, there was an eerie silence, with only the sound of the storm outside. The desks and chairs were still neatly arranged, covered in dust. The colorful posters on the walls had faded, and the room emitted a musty smell, like no one had set foot in it for years. Our phone flashlights illuminated the empty hallway, and the peeling paint on the walls and the broken tiles on the floor made the building feel even more ominous. As thunder roared outside, we wandered from one old classroom to another, carefully inspecting the leftover items inside. However, when we reached a corner, a faint sound echoed from the end of the hallway. We stopped and looked at each other, our hearts racing. The sound couldn't have been from the wind or dripping water, we all realized that. After a moment of silence, the sound came again, like something being dragged along the floor. We quickly turned off our flashlights and held our breath. At the end of the hallway, in the darkness, there seemed to be a shadow moving. We weren't sure what it was, but there was a palpable sense of unease. No one spoke, and fear began to spread among us. We decided to slowly back away and avoid that corner, but just as we were about to leave, the shadow suddenly started moving toward us. We didn't hesitate any longer and broke into a full sprint, running through one classroom after another until we found an open window. We scrambled out in a panic, not even daring to look back. The rain pelted our faces, but the sheer relief of escaping left us breathless. When we finally reached the parking lot, we ran frantically to the car, and only after starting the engine did we feel a moment of relief. The building was indeed demolished by the end of that year, and now it's just a grassy field. Although we never got caught for what we did that day, every time we think back to that shadow, we can't help but feel a shiver down our spines. To this day, we still don't know what was in that abandoned school. All we know is that the fear we felt in that moment was all too real. It was the first semester of college, and I was struggling in my chemistry class. The room was arranged in clusters, and I found myself seated at a middle table near the back. Across from me sat a classmate who was quiet, always focused on the subject, and surprisingly skilled in chemistry. At first, we barely spoke, but over time, we started talking when it became clear that I was not doing well in class. Our conversations were always casual and centered around coursework. My classmate noticed I needed help and started offering assistance. It started small, clarifying concepts, walking me through difficult problems, but eventually, they began offering to do homework for me and allowed me to glance at their test answers. It felt like they genuinely wanted to help, and although I didn't sense any ulterior motive, I never fully trusted them. As the semester drew to a close, I was grateful for the help. My grades had improved significantly, but I felt uneasy about how much I'd relied on someone else. Then, on the final day of class, something unexpected happened. My classmate awkwardly asked if we could meet up after class. The question caught me off guard. I had never considered us as anything more than casual acquaintances. I didn't feel attracted to them, and our personalities were worlds apart. So, I politely declined, using the excuse that I was going away for a while and wouldn't be available. However, my classmate wasn't deterred. They asked what would happen after I returned, and I gave a non-committal answer, hoping they would let it go. But the atmosphere between us shifted instantly. The rest of the class felt tense, and I made sure to leave quickly after it ended. That evening, I went out with friends to celebrate the end of the semester. As we laughed and enjoyed the night, my phone buzzed with a message asking when I would be leaving. I brushed it off, thinking I would respond later, but I never got around to it. The next morning, my phone had more messages, this time laced with frustration, accusations of using them and lying. I felt uneasy but replied with my original story, hoping that would be the end of it. That night, while out with friends again, I received another message, one that chilled me. My classmate claimed to know that I hadn't left, that I was still in town. Panic gripped me as I scanned the bar, wondering how they knew. Had they followed me? Were they watching me? The messages became more intense, filled with strange declarations and twisted logic, as though they believed our relationship had been more than what it was. By the time I got home that night, I felt suffocated by the fear that I was being stalked. Then, around 1 a.m. there was a knock at my door. My heart raced as I froze, terrified of who it might be. Their voice called out, asking to talk. I refused, pretending there was someone else home with me. After a tense few minutes, the knocking stopped. The next few days were a blur of fear and anxiety. I contacted my family, shared everything with my friends, and even went to the police. Though they tried reaching out to my classmate, there was no response. It was as if they had vanished. But even though they disappeared, the fear lingered, along with the realization that a seemingly harmless friendship had become something far more sinister.